Self-triggering. What is it? And why would we do it? Why would we put ourselves through this? Self-triggering is where we purposely put ourselves into a scenario, a place, a space where we know we're going to be triggered by something, by a specific wound or a specific trigger, in order for us to bring up the charge in our body. So when we're tapping, we want to be tapping so that we're bringing up that electrical charge in our body that has created like the densities in our meridians, so that we can tap on them and dissolve them, release them, and shift them out of our energy body so that we're moving through the world without these blocks anymore. So one way for us to do that is to put ourselves into a space where we know we're going to feel that charge, where we feel it the most, where it's like so activated and so triggered in our body that the charge is unavoidable. And what we can do there is, if we've created a safe space for ourselves to be in that trigger and to tap on it, then we can face up to it and release it. Sometimes there are layers to these things, and we might need to put ourselves into the space of self-triggering in different ways, in different spaces, to get like different angles and aspects of a wound. But it's very powerful. What it needs though is self-leadership. This is not something that I can guide you in. This is not something where I have a guided meditation for you to use. It is very specific to your needs and to your spaces, and you really need to be able to use a lot of leadership and guidance of yourself to lead yourself through this practice, but also to be very discerning around the container that you put yourself in doing it. So we're going to treat this a little bit like BDSM. You're putting yourself into a place of pain on purpose, okay? And so we need clear boundaries. We need a really safe container. We need an exit plan. And then we also need at the end a way to self-soothe if we need it. So we want to pre-plan a lot of these things. So first of all, having clear boundaries, what does that mean? You need to be really specific about what you're going to trigger and create this plan around how you're going to do that. So what are you wanting to trigger? Where and when are you triggered by this thing? Like where in your life does this trigger happen? Where is it activated? So you need to know how that trigger is activated. You need to decide how you are going to activate it for yourself. And you need to know how far you're willing to let yourself go before you activate your exit plan, before you need to get out. So these are the boundaries you're going to have in place. Next is to have a safe container. So you know how this trigger is activated. What you're going to decide now is how you are going to activate it in a way that is safe for yourself. And in a way that you are able to tap while feeling activated. So it's not just about getting yourself into a space where you're triggered, but being able to be triggered, sit with the trigger, feel it all in your body, and tap, because that's how we're going to release it. So think about, how can I know how this is triggered. How can I recreate that in a way where I have the time and space and the physical safety to then feel all of it, whether that means getting angry, crying, yelling, screaming, shaking, whatever that looks like in terms of feeling it all, and then tap on it to release it. We're calming parts of your limbic system as we're doing this. So you want to be able to make sure that you're tapping as you're going. Then have your exit strategy in place. You've already set your boundary of how far you're willing to go. You know where your limits are. You know when you're ready to get out. And so what this means is having a place or a way to remove the trigger when you need to. Now, if all goes according to plan, you won't need your exit strategy. You'll be able to sit with the trigger, tap until it's gone, and then allow yourself some time to replace those feelings with your own sense of safety. But if you do get to the point of going to your limit and you need to get out, you need to have a safe way to do that. So what does it look like for you to remove yourself from the trigger or to remove the trigger from yourself? How can you do that with this way that you are reactivating the trigger in a safe way? How can you then deactivate it, remove it? Have this plan in place. And then if you need to exit, you want to activate your self-soothe plan. So you have somewhere that feels soothing to go. It might be away from the place where you originally were, if you feel like you need a change of scene. And then a way to wrap yourself in love, to calm your nervous system, to bring yourself out of your sympathetic nervous system into your parasympathetic nervous system, where you basically want to have a way to really soothe your nervous system and bring yourself back to your center, to your safety, to your sense of love, to your God consciousness, to the fact that you are in control, everything is okay, all is well, all is well. So make sure you have this plan in place. You may need it if you use your exit strategy, then you may need to move straight into your self-soothe plan. And if you don't use your exit strategy, you may still feel like using your self-soothe plan after you've done the tapping. So when you're actually doing the tapping, when you have activated the trigger and you're feeling the charge in your body, you don't necessarily need to speak like we normally do in a tapping sequence. And sometimes you may not be able to, because when trauma is triggered in the brain, there's this part of the brain called the Broca's area that is that controls your speech, and it actually completely shuts down when trauma is activated. So if you have like a very specific and powerful trauma that you are triggering, then you may not be able to speak, and you don't need to. I'll explain why in a minute. But also you don't need to worry too much about the sequence. You don't necessarily have to have a setup statement. You just want to be tapping on whatever points you can remember in whatever order feels good, just focusing on tapping on the points and focusing on the charge in your body. Now, what happens when we're tapping, and what has been shown through scientific research on EFT, is that as we're tapping, we calm the amygdala, which is in the back of the brain as part of the limbic system, and it controls like this fight or flight stress response in the body, this activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So when we're in that space and we start tapping on the tapping points, this starts to calm the amygdala, and it brings the nervous system out of the sympathetic activation and back into the parasympathetic function, which is our normal rest and digest function. So what we're creating are these new pathways in the brain where we can see or be in this particular trigger, but because we've done this work to calm the amygdala, it no longer sees this trigger as something that we need to create the stress response from. And we can be in the space of what would normally be quite triggering and actually no longer feel triggered by it. We can bring a sense of calm and safety and like everything's okay. We can be aware of this trigger. It doesn't mean that whatever's triggering us is okay or it's right or we're going to stand for it. What it does is just remove that flight or fight response that stops us from being able to respond to it how we want to. So our body's calm and we're able to go into this space of using our logical brain, and maybe even putting forward some boundaries or creating some other way of being safe around whatever is happening externally. And of course, we know that when we change our internal reaction, we're changing our external environment. So as we start to calm the reaction towards some of these triggers, they're going to show up less in our life anyway. So what we know about the tapping now is that we don't necessarily need to speak. You don't need to necessarily go through a normal tapping sequence. The important thing is to focus on the trigger, focus on feeling everything that it's bringing up, creating it as much as possible in your body, feeling that charge, and then tapping on the points, because this is calming our nervous system. And then once you start to feel it dissipate, keep honing your focus into the trigger as much as possible. Keep trying to bring back the charge. Keep trying to feel it. And then keep tapping. And once you can no longer feel it as much as you're focusing on it, you know that you're dissolving it in your body. And then from there, you can start to create your own sense of safety. So it might be with some affirmations. It might be with stating what your boundaries from here forth are going to be. It might be with some higher belief systems that are not so limiting. They're more expansive. They make you feel better. They bring you back into your God consciousness. Or it may just be some other way that you are finding for yourself in terms of creating your own safety for whatever wound was there. So you may like to do this before you go into the tapping as well, is just being aware of what wound is being triggered by this trigger. What is the feeling of unsafety in the space that you're in before? And then once you've gone through the tapping and you've kind of released all of that and the wound is feeling not so fresh and raw, then what is the safety that you are creating for yourself for that particular wound? As much as possible, we want to be creating this inner core of safety for all of these different wounds, because we can't necessarily rely on other people to create that for us. And I believe, again, with our inner and outer world, so as we create that core safety within us, actually others are going to start to hold space for us anyway and create that safety for us anyway, because it's a reflection of our inner world. And so it might be evidence to you if you're starting to receive that in your outer world. It might be evidence that you're starting to create that in your inner world. And so to finish off your tapping, after the trigger has deactivated in your body, you can allow yourself to start to bring in those new beliefs around your own safety that you're creating from your inner self. Like, start creating some neural pathways, start creating some belief systems that are going to be embedded into your cellular memory with the tapping around your inner safety in this scenario. So if you go out in the world and you meet these triggers in other places and other ways and other, just in other spaces, then you want to be activating, instead of activating this trauma, you want to be activating this core sense of like centered safety. So what does that look like for you? And what are the belief systems that you are going to be putting in place with this last part of your tapping? Most importantly, make sure that you have gone through the steps and created the plan before you start putting yourself into these places of trigger. So important. Make sure that when you decide to work on a specific trigger, that you're being very specific about what it is. Make sure that when you do decide on a specific trigger, that you are in a space of being ready to lead yourself through it. This is a self-led practice, which means that you may not necessarily be able to be in this self-triggering practice for really intense traumas or really intense triggers until you've healed enough in a way that you feel like you can hold yourself by the hand and lead yourself through it. some examples of creating that container. When I was working on my sexual trauma, this is something that I did. I would seek or be aware of TV shows where there was rape scenes or sexual assault scenes happening, and deciding on a time and place where I could be alone to watch them, creating safety and comfort around myself to watch them, and then tapping, reminding myself I'm safe as I watched them. So that as an example was creating a safe container, being very specific about what I was going to be working on. I knew that my exit plan was just to turn off the TV if I couldn't handle anymore. At that stage of me playing with self-triggering, I didn't necessarily have a self-soothe plan in place, but this is something that I've added on because I think it's important. And the reason I feel it's important is because you don't necessarily know how it's going to go. And you need to be able to get out and create safety fast if you get to a point of not feeling good. And we need to have the plan in place beforehand, because when we are triggered very severely, the frontal lobe of the brain, where your logic and like your linear thinking comes from, can shut down. So when the amygdala is activated, the frontal lobes can't always think clearly. So it's really important that you have something in place so that you know what to do, where to go, and it's already ready for you without you having to logically think about what you need to do next. So we know that triggers are a good thing. That's our light in the dark. They are a good thing because they help us to heal. We can't heal our shadows when we can't see them. And so triggers are just the most beautiful way of our shadows going, hey, look at me, I'm right here. And they're a very powerful way to heal. And we know that self-triggering is a very powerful and empowering way to do that. But we also know that you need to be ready to hold the masculine for yourself while also crumpling, feeling, being in your wild feminine in order to heal. So there's this beautiful union going on with self-triggering, and yeah, it's a really beautiful, powerful practice. And I hope that you try it out and that you have the clarity and the space around any of your triggers, that you feel like you can create this container and this practice for yourself.